So the critical moment was driving my car to San Francisco, listening to Therapist Clubhouse. The person that you were interviewing was talking about building your practice around your life. And that message really resonated with me, that for a time my life was in San Francisco and it really wasn't anymore.
This is Therapist Clubhouse, a podcast for private practice entrepreneurs. I'm Annie Schusler. This week, I'm talking to Kaitlin Geenen, a private practice entrepreneur in Livermore, California. Listen as we talk about her relocation from San Francisco to Livermore, a smaller suburban town an hour away from the city. We talk about how she made the decision to change locations, the steps she took to make it happen, and what she learned. Sometimes we keep on running our businesses the way we do because we think that's the way it's supposed to be, even when it isn't working anymore. Notice those pivotal moments when Kaitlin realized she needed to make a change, and see if it brings up anything about your own business. It may not be about changing locations for you. It may be about your hours, your fees, the services you're providing. It may be something else. Hearing Kaitlin's story may help you tune into what needs to change in your business. Welcome, Kaitlin. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you for having me.
So I want to talk to you about something that a lot of people ask about. So I'm excited that you're willing to dive into this. You have moved and relocated your therapy practice. And so I want to find out all about how you did that, why you did that, and what you've learned from the process. So tell us about your move. You were located in San Francisco, and tell us what happened from there.
Yes. So I went to graduate school in San Francisco and started interning, and I started my private practice in San Francisco, and all of my professional network was built in San Francisco. So, and also I love the community there. I love the diversity of clients. It was a wonderful place to practice and have the network from my graduate program as well. It's a pretty vibrant network. So all of that was super enjoyable and had me based in San Francisco. But I moved out of the city to move in with my husband when I was an intern. Mm-hmm. So I started commuting into San Francisco basically right around the time that I got licensed and started, had my own office and everything, started commuting, but I wasn't that far away. I was just maybe about 30 minutes outside of the city. So I continued to commute for a while. And then when we had children, we decided to move further away to buy a house. And so we ended up moving to an area that's about an hour from the city, because it was sort of a good compromise for both of our jobs. So each of us had a commute, but it seemed like it would be doable. Mm-hmm. So I started commuting that commute probably about 3 years ago.
Okay, so you're doing an hour commute, and how many days a week were you doing that?
3.
Mm-hmm.
So I had a 3-day-a-week practice in the city, and and kind of on paper that sounded doable. Uh-huh. Because I thought, I have all this flexibility with my schedule, and so I can make it work. So what I did do was I made myself available to see clients very early in the morning, like starting as early as 7 a.m.
Wow. Okay.
And then I wanted to be home in the evening. So I would stop seeing clients by about like 3 o'clock or so to get on the road. Mm-hmm. and that worked. And I kind of put those boundaries on it, just knowing like, this is what I can do. And this is what I'm available for. And so that's how it was set up. And there was a lot of working professionals in San Francisco that I saw who liked those hours, and everybody was pretty flexible. So it seemed to be, I could see as many people as I wanted to.
See, the part I wouldn't have liked, I like those hours myself. The part I wouldn't have liked about that was the part where you're driving from like before 6 a.m, which then I'm thinking, okay, how early are you getting up to have to do that drive?
Yeah. And part of it, so I had one child at the time who I was able to work out within my family and with our care providers that it wasn't too disruptive for him that I was getting up early because he was home and either my husband was there or my in-laws were there. Because if you've ever tried to find daycares aren't even open that early. So it's like not going to work. So that worked for the time being. But then we had another child. And so when my second was born, I started thinking about practicing in Livermore. I had already started thinking about it.
And Livermore was where you were living.
Yeah, that's where we live. And I kind of just slowly like dipped my toe into trying to understand what it was like to practice out here, because it's quite a contrast from San Francisco. More so just it's suburban, it's slower, quieter. I think it's still pretty progressive, but nothing is really as progressive as San Francisco. And so I wanted to see, what was it like for therapists to work out here? So I started just making coffee dates with therapists in town and asking them, what's it like to work out here? How busy are you? How busy do you want to be? And just kind of getting a sense of that community. And actually, I heard really, really encouraging positive things from the people that I met with. Everybody was very encouraging and welcoming. And, when they kind of found out the specialties that I have and what I might offer the community, they were saying they were very validating just in terms of like, oh, that would be wonderful to have. We could totally use that. We could use somebody who has those specialties out here. There's plenty of work. There's plenty of need. So,
I love that. I love that attitude and that kind of welcoming, collaborative way of thinking.
Yeah, it was a couple of the women that I met with for coffee were so like warm and wonderful that they've become friends of mine. And, they're also colleagues too. But yeah, I just felt very encouraged and welcomed. And one of the great things that happened in doing that is that I was talking with one of the women who was saying, oh, we have a suite that has an extra space available right now. So that's something for you to consider if you're looking and you don't know where you're going to practice yet. And it happened to be in an office where there's other therapists, which was something that I thought would be helpful.
Yeah.
To be, in company with other therapists, being kind of a new therapist in town. So that's actually the space that I ended up renting.
Oh,
yeah.
Cool. And so what was your thinking when you're thinking like, I'm imagining the commute was one thing that you wanted to stop doing or cut back on doing. What were you thinking at first? Were you thinking like, I'm going to work in both places, or I'm going to get rid of my San Francisco location? Like, what was your mind going through around this?
I took a long time to feel ready to open an office here. It felt like a long time to me. And so I also kind of used the sort of like dipping my toe in approach. So initially I said, I'll just have one day a week here and I'll see how it goes. I'll see what the pace is like. I'll see what the demand is like, and keep my office in San Francisco for the other 2 days. So that was the split that I started with. And I think that was just the pace that I needed to go. I was not going to be somebody who could just sort of like close the San Francisco office and make that big leap and go straight into moving my practice all at once and opening up an office. And also it felt more financially risky as well to just close one completely and then reopen a new one. So I did the split for a while. And actually, I think I'm mixing up my timeline a little bit. So I had done that before my second son was born. I had started my my first office out here
But something about like having a second kid was really highlighting what wasn't working about your commute, it sounds like.
Yes, pretty much. So so when I was home on maternity leave with my second, I started thinking maybe I'll start to shift this and I will, because I felt really comfortable in Livermore. My office that I joined, that I rent out of, we have a monthly consultation group with all the therapists here. So that felt very, very encouraging, very welcoming. And I was getting to know those therapists much better and sharing referrals. And so I felt like I could expand. So my plan when I was going to go back to work from my second was to switch my practice from one day out here to 2 days in Livermore and then 1 day in San Francisco. So that was what I actually did when I came back from maternity leave. And again, kind of like the best laid plans. I thought it would be fine, but it turns out life is just a lot more complicated with 2 kids. And so doing that commute, even that 1 day a week when I came back from maternity leave, once I was really listening to myself and kind of paying attention to how that felt in terms of stress and work balance and family life and doing all of that, I just really started getting the sense that it wasn't going to be long before I needed to close my San Francisco office. It just wasn't going to be sustainable.
Yeah. I think it's tough in any circumstances. I think it's tough to have 2 locations, especially 2 locations that aren't really close by, because your energy, your marketing energy, and the way that you're kind of trying to spend your time gets pulled in these 2 directions. Were you finding that part was difficult, like knowing where to put your energy?
So yes and no. So I definitely was spending more time on the Livermore office because I was wanting it to grow. And my San Francisco office and all of the marketing stuff I did there, I kind of put on autopilot. Although I did consult. So I worked with a woman who helped me with the search engine optimization for my website. And when I opened a second office, I had her make some adjustments to my website to reflect that I had a new office. But it's interesting because I know that she did that, and I still feel like most of my calls and most of my SEO was reflecting San Francisco. So that was kind of self-sustaining because that was still there. The website was pretty strong for San Francisco. So I didn't feel like I had to do much to keep that. And I felt more like I needed to focus on building a network out here.
Yeah.
But I also did keep in touch with sort of my circle of people in San Francisco. When I could, I would still meet them for coffee or have lunch and kind of keep a pulse on that. So, but yeah, I mean, it is doing almost like twice, right? You're doing like 2 times the amount of upkeep.
Yeah. And I hear a lot of people thinking that having 2 locations will be great because it'll bring them 2 different populations. And when you're just one person, that's not usually the case. It doesn't usually end up feeling more abundant as much as it ends up feeling like you're pulled in 2 directions. So what was the critical moment when you realized I got to move this whole thing to Livermore? Like I need to close my San Francisco office.
So the critical moment was driving my car to San Francisco, listening to Therapist Clubhouse. The person that you were interviewing was talking about building your practice around your life. And that message really resonated with me, that for a time my life was in San Francisco and it really wasn't anymore. And like part of my professional life felt like it always needed to be there, but my whole life, really my whole world, my kids and everything that matters were in Livermore. And so it just felt like this has to grow around that, or else I'm just not going to feel right. And this is always going to feel like a chore.
Yes. This is always going to feel like a chore.
Like going to the other office.
Yes. Yeah. That commute and pulling yourself out of your community.
Yeah. And I think too, like a long-term vision of practicing, I did feel a draw to kind of dig into my community more, to be here more as a professional and offer, what I'm trained in my own community as a way of like being a part of the community instead of just being like a commuter of my own community.
What was that process like for you? Was it scary? Was it scary to tell your clients? How long of a process was it between when you decided you were closing San Francisco and when it actually happened?
So once I had that moment in the car, the first thing I did to try to make it more real was I just started telling people that were close to me that I was going to do it. I didn't tell clients yet, but I just started talking to my colleagues and my closest therapist friends and saying, you know what, like, I know this has to happen. I've been listening to myself and this is what I'm hearing. So I just want you to know that too, so you can keep me accountable.
Great. Yeah.
And, I've told my husband. And so that really sort of like started making it more real. And then I think I told my clients, I gave them about 2 months of notice that was going to start happening.
What was that time like for you?
I think it was not as difficult as I imagined, because what I've found is that in my practice, when my energy changes, things in my practice with my clients tend to line up too for some reason. So it's not like people are having to transition kicking and screaming. It's lining up with their life stuff too. So some of the clients that I maybe was more worried about, clients who have more attachment work that's going on, that I would be more concerned about transitioning or letting them know that I'm closing my practice. They were kind of in these places where they were ready to shift in different ways, or they were contemplating like leaving the Bay Area, or were, I don't know, it's just kind of synchronous like that, I've found. So
what do you think some of the differences have been in terms of what works to bring in clients in Livermore as opposed to what worked in San Francisco? Has your marketing changed?
I've always enjoyed the part of marketing where you go and meet other people and you learn about their practice and you learn about what is out in the community. So I've always done that and enjoyed doing that. What I did find the difference to be is in San Francisco, I would say I got a lot more of my clients through online searches and Psychology Today, some referrals, and then out here in Livermore, it's much more referral based.
Okay.
And maybe that's just because I'm in a transition with my marketing. So once I closed my San Francisco office, I switched all of my SEO and I took everything off of my website for San Francisco. And since doing that, I do think I've had some more inquiries where people have told me, oh, I was just searching this type of therapist or searching this type of issue. When I had both offices, I had more clients coming from referral from other therapists. And it seems like that is still kind of a stronger source out here, is therapists referring to other therapists or kind of complementary practitioners referring.
We haven't talked about your niche. What do you do? Like, what is your specialty? Who do you work with?
My specialty is people who are struggling with eating issues, sort of the spectrum of more intense behaviors to sort of what is sometimes called disordered eating. I see kind of the full range of issues with eating, from kind of binging to restricting behaviors and sort of everything in between.
Okay, so then that's a specialty that's really going to stand out in either place. And I think that's a really helpful thing that you had going for you in making that location change, is that you weren't going to get lost in either place. You weren't going to get lost as you moved to Livermore in kind of the sea of therapists, in that you could really articulate how what you do is different.
Yeah, it's interesting practicing out here and being in consultation with therapists in Livermore. I hear people's practices out here tend to be more general or broad, where they're willing to see, pretty much most things they'll see couples, they'll see individuals, they'll see families, they'll see adolescents, kids, adults, like really broad.
Yeah.
And then I was coming in with like more of a niche, which is very much more common in San Francisco. Like people can be uber niched in San Francisco. Like you know, I would refer somebody within the circle of eating disorder therapists for just somebody who wants to see an adolescent versus an adult, or somebody who is more versed in like trans LGBTQ issues than maybe another therapist. Like it can just be so micro niched. So it is interesting to have those specialties out here because it's not as common, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
And at first I thought, oh my gosh, I'm like too specialized out here. I'm not going to be busy. I'm going to have to be more broad or something. And luckily that's not been the case.
Okay. So that's really interesting. So in San Francisco, you wouldn't really have to even think about being too niched, although I know people absolutely do, and they get scared of niching too much in San Francisco. But if you're in a smaller town, there is kind of a realistic need to have a niche that isn't too narrow, that like your niche is still absolutely broad enough for just about anywhere. So now you're still working 3 days a week?
Yes.
And you're all in Livermore. How many sessions do you like to have in a given week?
I like to have about 10 to 15 sessions a week.
Mm-hmm. And what are you charging?
I charge $160.
Did you charge the same in San Francisco? Did you always have the same fee across both places before you relocated completely?
Yeah. So initially, when I started working out here, I said it's going to be the same fee. Like I'm the same person, even though there are some economical differences. And then I was in consultation and kind of talking about that with colleagues who had different fees and hearing like kind of what the going rate was out here. And it made me that was maybe a little bit intimidating, as thinking, oh my gosh, am I going to be too high? Are people going to be turned away by what my fee is out here? But I kind of stuck with it that I was going to not have it be different prices, because it gets really tricky when you're trying to be consistent with your communications, you know, with what's on your website and what's on your consent forms and what's on Psychology Today, that I kind of wanted it to not be confusing. So yeah, it's the same.
Yeah. And if you could time travel, let's say back to the time when you first started relocating to Livermore, what would you tell the Kaitlin of that time?
I think I might just want to encourage her to practice being mindful a little bit more. Mm-hmm. Because, you know, I have a mindfulness practice, but it sort of waxes and wanes. Mm-hmm. And when I'm in those times that I'm being more mindful and more connected, that's when I really hear what I need to hear, what I really need to be listening to make adjustments to my work and to my life. And I don't know if that would have made things go at any different pace, because I definitely did the transition in a pace that felt sustainable to me. And so I don't know that like it needed to be any faster, but maybe I would have heard the message a little bit earlier. I'm not sure.
Mm-hmm. But there's something about the feeling of the transition that you would want to really tap into mindfulness.
I think so. You know, I don't think it's very easy or comfortable to mindfully commute.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
But when you do, you really notice the impact that it has. And so when you keep noticing that over and over again, it kind of feels like something that you can't ignore. And if you are ignoring it, then I don't know, I think something else is being sacrificed. Somebody I was talking to when I was describing how I was going to be making this change was kind of putting it in perspective in terms of like from a business standpoint, that's time lost where you could be seeing people, those hours of commuting, because it's not really just like 1 hour when you're 1 hour away. It's more than that. Is is time lost where you could be working or being more productive? And that was kind of motivating to think about too. Like I could make this, I could be making money. I could be doing things that would be better for my business than just driving.
Excellent. Yeah. I remember when I actually had a weird thing where I was living in Oakland and working in San Francisco. And then I ended up moving to San Francisco in the middle of that. So according to my clients, nothing changed. But for me, I lost my whole commute. And I do remember doing the calculations of, okay, this is like another, between 7 and 10 hours a week that I can either put into my business or into my life outside of my business. Like this is game changing.
Yeah. And that's another thing that I noticed once I was fully based out of Livermore. It opened up a lot of space that I had been missing for taking care of myself, and not being rushed all the time, and remembering that there's other things I like to do that sustain me as a therapist, that I get that time back too when I'm not commuting. And that's super important for longevity.
What is the best place for people to find you and throw compliments at you, Kaitlin?
The best place is probably my website, which is just my name, KaitlinGeenen.com. And they can email me from there.
Perfect. Thank you so much. I really want to thank you for walking us through this journey. It's been really helpful.
Thank you for having me. My pleasure. So happy to be part of your community.
Thanks for listening. To help other people find this little but fierce podcast, please tell your best therapist friends about it and take a minute to rate and review on Apple Podcasts. I truly appreciate it. I will see you next week. I just had like a brain fart, but I'm back.